Excellent. And for folks that are already joining, the way that the conversation will go is Ben Foreman, from the Research Director of MassInc, will start with a big Neighborhood Hub welcome and also go over some of the incredible research that MassInc has been doing. We will then move to Representative Mary Keefe, who will talk about the importance of housing in the gateway cities and in our beautiful city of Worcester. Robert Jenkins will then talk about the Neighborhood Hub's work in Brockton. Wandy Pascoal will talk about the importance of development in small lots in Boston. And Jim will then finish it off with the work that Worcester is doing around housing redevelopment. Jim is the Director of Housing Development and Healthy Homes in the city of Worcester. And afterwards, we will have a panelist roundtable where folks that are attending can ask our wonderful panelists questions. Following every speaker, there will be a short Q&A session, so please feel free to send any questions to the chat, and we will try to answer as many as we can. And with that being said, it's around 10:03, so I will stop sharing my screen, and Ben, you can start sharing it so that we can start the presentations in a bit. Oh, nice, Kelsey's here. Let me move Kelsey back.
Okay, are we live, Francis, or?
We are now recording and live, so you can start now.
Oh, excellent. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Renew and Repair, a conversation hosted by the Neighborhood Hub. I'm Ben Foreman, Director of the Gateway Cities Innovation Institute at MassInc. I've got the pleasure of providing some introductory thoughts this morning. The Hub is a cross-sector effort that MassInc is proud to be a part of. It's led by MassHousing, and it aims to ensure that all of our communities have the resources they need and the capacity to respond to local market conditions and keep their housing stock, their neighborhoods, and their residents healthy and strong. The leadership the Baker administration has shown, as well as the Attorney General's Office, MHP, MACDC, and other partners working with Gateway City legislators to build and invest in this initiative is just incredible. And I think it's proven to be extraordinarily timely. And if I could indulge, I've got just a couple of slides I'd like to share this morning to give you a sense of where we think the latest trends are in gateway cities. Just trying to find my PowerPoint window, has disappeared all of a sudden. There it is. So, you know, when Gateway City leaders came to us, I think in 2016 or 2017, they were deeply concerned by blighted and abandoned property in their neighborhoods and the problems those properties were causing. You know, they had been through a sharp downturn after the Great Recession, lost at least a third of their property value. They had substantial resources in 2010, 2011 to deal with the foreclosure crisis and its legacy, but they quickly spent through those funds, and they had many more properties they were struggling to acquire and rehab, and they were hoping for the state's partnership in that effort. And there was lots of conversations about what the right tools would be and how we help gateway cities build the capacity to ensure that they are keeping their housing stock healthy. Since that time, gateway city home values have continued to appreciate a bit, but the pandemic experience has been something I think nobody expected. Over the last year, we've seen significant increases in home values in gateway cities. If you look at the 11 gateway cities, those are the communities that are really outside of 495, and where the housing markets had in recent years been the weakest. Those are the areas where we've seen the greatest appreciation, 15% in just the past year. So all of the losses of the Great Recession have been made up, and in real terms, home values are higher now than they were back in the early 2000s. It's also notable that we've seen the greatest appreciation in the last year in the lowest income neighborhoods of our gateway cities. The places where we had the more blighted properties and more concern in recent years have actually seen the greatest increase in prices in the last few months. We put out a report this time last year that looked at the share of buyers in gateway cities, of home buyers of color in Massachusetts that were purchasing in gateway cities. The data we had at that time only went through 2017. We've been able to update that more recently to have a look at what's happening, including through the first part of the pandemic anyhow. And you can see that gateway cities have retained very large shares. The majority of the Latinx buyers, the majority of Black or African-American buyers in Massachusetts are purchasing in our gateway cities. But gateway cities have also gained slightly larger share of white residents, which contradicts the census data, which shows very significant losses in white population. I think a lot of that has more to do with the changing of the form and people reporting multiracial. In the home mortgage data collection, they don't have as many choices. And so I think we're actually seeing a stronger share of gateway cities retaining all residents in the Commonwealth. One of the concerns, though, we pointed to when we looked at this last time was that buyers of color were disproportionately purchasing in the neighborhoods that had been most impacted by the Great Recession. So when we looked at the neighborhoods that were unstable, they had high vacancy rates, high rates of churn, high poverty rates after the Great Recession. 40% of Hispanic and Latino buyers were purchasing in those areas, and a third of Black or African American buyers. Since that time, we've seen a little bit of a shift with some of Latinx buyers purchasing in other gateway neighborhoods, but more white buyers purchasing in the less stable areas, or what had been the less stable areas. So I think overall, that's probably a good sign of those neighborhoods strengthening and continuing to recover. The last data point that we look at really closely is how much residential investment is there in our gateway cities on a per capita basis. And so while we see home values appreciating, we don't see levels of investment returning to what we saw in the 2010s in gateway cities outside of 495. That gray line there at the bottom, there's pretty minimal residential growth each year when we look at the Department of Revenue's numbers of what's being added to the tax base. Whereas the gateway cities closer to Boston have seen a doubling of the share of residential investment that's occurring. Not nearly as much as the growth we've seen in Boston, but still healthy growth and significant residential investment. So we're trying to make sense of all these different trends. We've got a lot more. I've got an incredible intern, Julia Gainley from UMass Amherst, who's working on this, and we'll be sharing more with you soon. But I just want to, share a couple of takeaways to frame the conversation this morning. I think there is absolutely momentum that we can harness to strengthen our gateway city neighborhoods with the federal recovery resources we have and the state capital funds that have been devoted to neighborhood stabilization in the economic development bill that Governor Baker signed last year. I think there's really urgency to take advantage of this momentum and these resources, the opportunity that we have, because in an era of hybrid work, neighborhood context is going to matter more to people who have a choice about where they live than it ever has before. I also think there are real risks that we should appreciate coming down the road. One is, if you look at our population, the aging population, we shouldn't celebrate the numbers we saw from this census prematurely. I think the next decade is going to be much more difficult in terms of household formation and population growth. It's going to make it more important that gateway cities continue to compete for those households, particularly the households of color, where we are seeing growing population, and gateway cities are doing what they need to do, hopefully, to make sure that they're welcoming and inclusive communities for those families. There's continued threats in terms of the service jobs that have been lost when they'll come back with increasing automation. There are many economists who believe that low to moderate income families are going to face a very difficult next decade. So I think, as they say, the best defense is a strong offense. And the work that the Neighborhood Hub, the partners in all the communities are doing to make sure that we're really thoughtful about the needs of our gateway cities and how we address them and respond to them to keep the neighborhoods healthy and strong is more vital work than ever before. So I thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts, and I look forward to hearing from everybody this morning.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for all of that information. It's stunning to see what is happening and see it in real time with the amazing data that you all produce. Now that we have that picture, let's move forward to Representative Mary Keefe, who will share some thoughts. Representative, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Francis, and thank you everyone for being here today. This is such an important conversation for all of us to be considering, and I really want to reach out to Ben and say thank you so much for your research and for really giving us, strong data that we can look at to better understand where opportunities are and where challenges still remain. I'm going to talk mainly about the Piedmont neighborhood, which is part of my district, but there are other parts of my district that are very, very similar in lots of ways. So by talking about Piedmont, it's where I have the strongest history or the most history, and I know it probably best. And just for some context, before I came into the legislature, I worked as an organizer in this neighborhood, and it's also the neighborhood that I live in. And so that's the context for saying I know it best. For Piedmont, I'm anxious to see what the new census data is, but like when we were working on this, the idea of housing or neighborhood stabilization 12 to 15 years ago, the owner occupied rate for that, most of our census tracts, and we're talking about 3 census tracts, was around 11 and 12%. And anybody that can kind of picture what that is knows that that leaves communities, neighborhoods really in a fragile state where housing isn't very stable. People have invested, and I'm going to say this kind of crudely, but people have invested for the money and for collecting rents, and they didn't necessarily have real care about the community or the neighborhood, and therefore didn't really invest in terms of improving properties. So as a result, what we've seen here is a lot of disrepair and blight. And Francis, you and I have talked about this because, when we think about our neighborhoods here in Worcester, we have a long history of being a welcoming community to immigrants, to people that are moving from one place to another, people that are really just newcomers that are trying to get their legs under them to achieve the American dream. And isn't that what all our gateway cities are? So when we look at 3-deckers here in this neighborhood and in other parts of the city, I think we see a real need for both preservation and some production as well. The idea of a 3-decker really makes it so affordable for families. And we have a number of families right here in this part of the city that have for generations lived in this way, where you have 2 other rental incomes that you're able to really help make your situation and holding a mortgage more affordable. But our 3-deckers were built using construction that really doesn't meet the standards of today. And we're really looking for ways that we can help support owners to be able to make their home safe and livable, and to create more affordability through stabilizing those kinds of housing for folks. So that's why we look at the Neighborhood Stabilization Fund. We also are looking at ARPA money. I'm really excited to hear from Jim Brooks today about what his vision is there. But we've done a lot here in Worcester around development downtown. And that's all good. But most of that housing is going to young professionals or retired folks, empty nesters. And so where are our families going to go? I know of a number of constituents that were looking to try and get in the market over the last 5 or 6 years, and they were leaving Worcester. They were going to Fitchburg because of its affordability. So, and those are great people. We need them here. They're a strong part of our community and have a lot to offer. So I'm excited to be part of this conversation. I think there are other opportunities coming up with community reinvestment as well. We've talked about that, sort of matching funds. And I really think now is the time, because if we could model something really strong in 4 gateway cities, that really had a strong impact, we could prove that this is a good direction to go in. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you for inviting me to be here today.
Great, thanks so much, Rep. Hey everyone, my name is Sebastian Zapata. Work here closely with Francis over at MassHousing. And again, just wanted to appreciate those words from Representative Mayor Keefe. At this point, we're going to move on from the city of Worcester onto the city of Champions, Brockton. We're going to have Robert Jenkins, who's the executive director for the Brockton Redevelopment Authority, present to us some of his findings and some of the work that's been ongoing there. So Robert, the floor is yours.
Sure, thank you folks. Once again, thank you for inviting me. Sebastian, thank you for that introduction. I am Robert Jenkins, the executive director of the Brockton Redevelopment Authority. I've been here in the city of Brockton. I consider this like my second tour. I've been here since 2009. Previously, I was here in the late mid-90s, and so I've seen a lot of changes in the city. Couple of things just to give you a little bit of context here. The city of Brockton is approximately 95, 100,000 folks. Housing has always been affordable. We're 23 miles south of Boston. We have a commuter rail that has 3 stops that get you into the financial district in 25, 30 minutes, which is interesting only because I'm working with a developer who lives in West Roxbury, says it takes him an hour and a half on the commuter rail to get to the financial district of Boston. So we do provide, at that time, I would say, we did provide a very good transportation system into the city of Brockton. What I'm going to talk about for this panel, and I know I only have 15 minutes, Ben, your information is really informative, and I like to digress into that when we have time, but I have a presentation I need to show as well. So I'm going to share my screen, I believe, if I can. Here we go. Share. Can everybody see that? If you can shake your head and let me know you can see that, that'd be great.
Yes, we can.
I did have a little bit of technical difficulty earlier, which I am not the most technical person here. And I had to have my staff come in just so I can get my volume back. But once again, City of Brockton, City of Champions, we're working with Neighborhood Hub on a, what I will call setting up an organizational 121A corporation. It's interesting because we were very active in the receivership program prior to the pandemic. And this is really a response to the pandemic, to be quite honest. If I look back at it, we actually set up a receivership program here in the city of Brockton, modeled after New Bedford, Springfield, and Worcester. Matter of fact, Jim, you probably were around when I was talking to Andy about the receivership program. But due to the pandemic, with the courts closing down, the Board of Health having a new, much more important agenda, which is dealing with COVID-19 and the pandemic, we haven't had really any activity over the last year and a half, almost 2 years in the receivership program. We did get a lot of assistance also from the AG's office, as well as MassHousing Partnership. But now we have, and this is, I guess, part of those of you who are in this field understand, our skill set is really like crisis management. Whenever there's a crisis, we kind of step up and figure out how we can increase affordable housing, not just maintain and preserve it, but increase it, especially in the gateway cities. Our law department deals with a lot with a lot of different issues, union issues, and the receivership program really depended on the Board of Health, our law department, which we got assistance from the AG's office, but also just an entity, usually the Redevelopment Authority being named receivers. And when you talk about 3 families, 2 families, we really did get the dogs that really, what I call the dogs, because they needed everything. You know, usually all the metal and plumbing and everything was taken out. But what we come to find and look through, and I have to give more credit to this to Rob May, who's our Director of Planning and Economic Development, and Rob Corley over at NeighborWorks. The one thing that the city did have was a relationship with many different organizations in the city departments. We do work as a team here in Brockton. And this is just to give you some idea of the entities that we work with in order to, one, to make this work. And then just to put it out there, we still haven't set this up. That's kind of what we're in the process of doing and looking at it. I think it's more of a hybrid of the receivership program and Mass General Law 111. You got to excuse me, sometimes I skip over things. Mass General Law 111 is a state sanitary code that allows anyone, a municipality or anyone, to put a property under receivership that is not fit for human habitation. This combined with, and Ben, your information from the 2006, 2007, Brockton was hit very hard from the last recession. I think we may have been second in the state, only to maybe Dorchester, as far as foreclosed properties. And a lot of our properties still have the vacant, abandoned property is a remnant still of that era. And you think about it, that's almost 10, 11, 12 years ago. But we still have these remnants of that recession that we're going through. So here are some of the departments, the quality of life, which is huge, the mayor's office, the planning department, the Board of Health, which is essential here, our law department, even working with NeighborWorks. We had a very aggressive receivership program. We plan to have a very aggressive 121A corporation that would be a subsidiary or an independent organization with NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. Our goal, or its goal or vision, is to really increase home ownership. We have a very aggressive, through NeighborWorks Housing Solutions, a very aggressive home ownership training program, education program. It's full every month. We work with a lot with the lenders, Brockton Housing Partnership, which is what I call a coalition of local lenders. There's about probably 10 to 15 local lenders in the city of Brockton. Under Mass General Law, it will allow us to create a local for-profit urban renewal corporation that can leverage private as well as non-conventional funding. We talked about NSP. We went through NSP 1, NSP 2, NSP 3, and now it looks like we even have an NSP 4 from the state coming up, which we'll have to learn how to access that money, which Francis and I have talked about as well. This is just what I would consider a hybrid, or just another tool in the toolbox, to be quite honest, dealing with distressed abandoned property here in the city of Brockton. Some of the common challenges or tasks with Mass General Law 111, which was the receivership, the state sanitary code. It's really the enforcement, local enforcement of the state sanitary code, working with the Board of Health, housing court, or district court or superior court. The fact that you, under this program or under Mass General Law 111, you had to spend a lot of time in court and getting the judge just to approve a receiver. Working with the legal department, we didn't have the capacity or the bandwidth, and that's why we depended a lot on the Attorney General's office, who actually spent maybe 3 years here in the city of Brockton doing the receivership program. Inspectional services is key, working along with the Board of Health. Some of the common challenges I see with setting up Mass General Law 111, revitalization corporation, is the fact that it does have eminent domain process. Some people think that's easier than going through the courts, Believe me, that's a misnomer. It is not easy doing an eminent domain under any circumstances. Even if it's a friendly one, sometimes it's difficult. Establishing a funding resource, which is interesting now because previously, as I mentioned, we had NSP, now we have ARPA, which the city of Brockton, working through the mayor's office, is looking at designating a certain percentage, which I think a lot of the gateway cities has actually taken on as a policy for their ARPA funds. And hopefully Jim can tell us a little bit more about that when he talks about Worcester. We're looking at setting probably 25 to 30% of those funds towards housing, which makes a lot of sense here in the city of Brockton. Cost of acquisition and rehabilitation. Everybody knows the cost of rehab and just materials have gone up over the pandemic. And the thing is, it's interesting because I was talking to a contractor who says buying 2x4s and lumber is very expensive now. He did his budget a year and a half ago and he's blown it. I think Neighbor Works, we just built a new development here. They're over their budget due to cost. Clearing title of the properties is another big issue. The receivership program through Mass General Law 111, if it's placed under receivership, you can actually clear title. We had several title insurance. There's only two that I can think of that actually assisted us in clearing title on a number of abandoned foreclosed properties in the city of Brockton. I'm not sure, and we're looking to hire a consultant to help us set this organization up. Hopefully they will give us some insight on how we can clear title on a lot of these properties. Just talking with New Bedford and actually talking with Jim, I talked to you earlier this week. We all have this issue of zombie properties still in our communities. And how do we deal with them? How do we get them back into productive use? Opportunity for job training is also one I worked for in Dorchester Bay Economic Development Corporation, and we always had a job training component to most in all of our development, and that's what we hope to do here as well. Here are some before and after pictures we've done under receivership. As you can see, this was another property that had title issues. There had to be two or three, at least two banks, a mortgage company that was involved in this property. We took it under receivership, cleared title, rehabbed it. It is a two-family. I think there were 4 units in it. 2 of them were illegal, but it was abandoned and it sat in this particular neighborhood. And I can't emphasize how much these properties impact small growing neighborhoods. I mean, you have one of these and your neighborhood can go down very quickly. And we've seen that a lot in Brockton. So this is one we took under receivership, cleared the title, and then sold it to a first-time home buyer through training, through NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. Once again, this one, we just did this maybe pre-pandemic. So we're talking 2019. However, when I got here in 2009, this property sat for about 3 years and it was abandoned when I got here. This was, I'll name the banks. This was US Bank and Bank of America property, along with another mortgage company that had a security interest in this property. No one could clear title. No one would take responsibility for it. We put it under receivership, rehabbed it into a 2-family. Once again, they just moved into this pre-pandemic. So it must have been in October of 2019, but this is the house and they did a very good job. One of the things I emphasize now is that property has, as everyone, and the documents that we seen from Ben, the data shows a lot of these houses now, I'm not even gonna mention what we sold this for, but the price has increased. Thank God for affordability restrictions, mortgage restrictions we put on these properties, because I would consider selling it at this point for what they can get for this property, which is well over $600,000. Believe me, we did not spend that much. Well, we almost did in rehab of it. So here's just the City of Champions. These are the folks, my number, my email address, as well as Rob Corley. Francis, you know us as the City of Robs. Our mayor is Robert F. Sullivan. I didn't put him on here. That would be too many Roberts. But yeah, if you need any information, Jim and I stay in contact. Pat Sullivan in New Bedford, Sean Glennon in Quincy. One thing about I can say with a lot of and Jim, you know this, Region 1, this is how HUD describes us. Region 1, we usually stay in contact with a lot of not just the gateway cities, but all of the municipalities. Because the good thing about this is that we learn from each other. We try to use the best practices. What works for usually one gateway city of similar size usually works with the other because we're both experiencing the same issues, the same challenges. So with that, I'll just say thank you. And if there's any questions afterwards, I'll be more than happy to address them. Should I unshare my screen, or Sebastian, will you kick me off now?
No, no, no. I mean, it might be, live at the Apollo, maybe get the hook out, but that's about it. Robert, thanks so much for that presentation. I know I found that very insightful. We only have time for one question just because we're a little bit behind time, but this is a reminder that there will be a panel discussion at the end of this. So if you have any more questions that folks want to get into it, that'll be the time to do so. But I guess just something that popped out at me was from the first slide that you shared, just all the different agencies or departments that are involved in this process. And I'm sort of wondering if you have any thoughts or best practices of your own of how you keep the train moving forward, so many different agencies or partners working. Granted, everyone's trying to strive for the same mission here, but everyone might have, a different way to get to that mission. So how do you keep it moving forward with so many different partners?
I think it's really about leadership. I would say I'm not blessed. I think in every gateway city, it's really about the leadership and the commitment of the leadership to make sure that every department is talking to each other. We don't have an ISD like Boston does, but we have a quality of life. And I just met with them this morning. We meet at 8:30 on Thursdays, usually or 9 o'clock on Thursday, usually to 10 o'clock. I had to cut it short, but it's keeping everyone engaged. There's no doubt in my mind that everyone who lives in a particular city or gateway city or anywhere in any community in America is concerned about their community. It's about the quality of life. And the only way you can do that is if everyone is communicating, at least on some level, communicating what the other one's doing. We have a good relationship with the building department, the fire department, sometimes not as good as I like with the Board of Health, but they have their limits as well. Just like we do here at the BRA, I have limitations. There are certain things, though, that I know are important to the community that may be important to the law department. Just talking to Pat Sullivan down in New Bedford, we experience the same thing with our law departments. But you have to understand, and you have to be respectful of what they do. They're negotiating contracts. This is not at the top. Your issue may not be at the top of the agenda due to time, due to whatever it is they're working on. And this is one of the reasons why we look at setting up another corporation where it's not so strenuous on the law department or any particular department, or the BRA for that matter, the Brockton Redevelopment Authority, that there's another agency that we can actually assist, communicate, and getting us. We all want to get to the same place. It's just how you get there. That's what I mean. It's really about leadership.
Great. So at this point, thank you, Robert. Again, if you have questions, we will have that panel discussion at the end of this. But at this point in time, we're going to go from the City of Champions to the real City of Champions, which is Boston, Massachusetts. Let's be real about it. And we're going to have Wandy Pascoal from the Housing Innovation Lab give us a little presentation about the work that's been ongoing with her and her team. So Wandy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Sebastian. Thank you, everybody. I'm truly delighted to be here with you this morning to share a little bit about our ongoing initiative. So my name is Wendy Pasquale. I'm a Housing Innovation Design Fellow, and I have the privilege and pleasure of working with both the Boston Society for Architecture and the City of Boston's Housing Innovation Lab. And so I will share my screen now. Great. So today I'll be sharing a little bit about our ongoing initiative, which we've titled Co-Creating Boston's Future Decker, which at its core is really centered around how we can create ideate and eventually implement development ideas for small lots here in the city of Boston. And to provide a little bit of context to those that might not be familiar, although I doubt that there are folks on this call who are not familiar with the multifamily housing landscape in Boston, I just wanted to go over a few building typologies that might be incredibly familiar to us. So we know that here in Boston, we have building types such as row houses, two-family homes, triple deckers or three deckers. We have 12 packs, which are essentially 12 units agglomerated together, and also buildings that are made up of about 7 to 30 units. And when we compare this to the data of building types that have been permitted over the last 9 or so years here in Boston, we notice that there has been an increase, right? Or that there are single, 3, and 9 unit buildings that are actually among the top permitted building types here in Boston, followed by two-family homes. And we recognize from this data that there actually is a lot of opportunity to take a look at how we can innovate around the creation of buildings that would potentially include 7 to 30 units. This is also an opportunity for us to help to define and promote Boston's missing middle. And to those of you that might be familiar with the missing middle ideology, it's really centered around buildings that can fit within a neighborhood context that resemble single family homes or smaller scale or even middle scale housing that can be brought to numerous cities to help to provide affordable housing options for folks. But we wanted to begin with something that was truly familiar. And so we started much of our own exploration and research by taking a look at the triple decker or three decker, as is known to many. And so last year, we began this collective and collaborative exploration with residents, with students, with architects, developers, and numerous others to hear about their experiences with triple or three deckers here in the city of Boston. So here's a building type, and thank you to Representative Mary Keefe for talking a little bit about this earlier, but for over 100 years, three deckers have served to be the homes of numerous families, immigrant, working class, middle class, families of color here in the city of Boston. But today they face numerous challenges when we talk about even trying to build a new triple decker, right? Many of them are actually being sold for over $1 million when originally the premise around this was to really have a replicable model that could provide deeply affordable housing for folks. And so in these conversations that we hosted with numerous others, we actually also asked folks to envision the future of this building type. So what does a new iteration of a triple decker, what we've been describing as the future decker, offer as an opportunity, especially during a year where folks' relationships to their homes truly change? So could there be a consideration for more outdoor space, thinking of the balconies that are often associated with this building type? Could there also be a consideration for work from home space, home offices? Is there room for even growth as we consider larger families being in the city and needing to have those spaces in which to live? And so we began to ask the following questions, which were really, how can we support the creation of more multifamily housing in the city, and where can we turn to? And so we turned to smaller lots, which pose their own sets of challenges, right? Here in Boston, we have high costs of land. We have high construction costs as well. There are numerous site limitations, things like setbacks, et cetera, and also a lack of predictability for communities and developers. But small lots also offer us a number of benefits and opportunities. So we've been considering how can we promote responsible and sustainable uses of urban space in Boston, addressing the needs for more housing options, recognizing that there is an increased demand for multifamily housing. Boston has also set an ambitious goal to build 69,000 units of housing by 2030. So really taking this into account. And finally, how can we create development opportunities for smaller scale actors? We recognize that housing at this middle scale is actually incredibly difficult for contractors, builders, emerging firms to really get a hold into this type of development. So how can we think creatively around that, and what can facilitate this type of development? And so we also asked, how can we, as the Boston Society for Architecture and the Mayor's Housing Innovation Lab, test innovative solutions to bringing housing development on small sites by taking a look at our own inventory as the city. So we turn to a familiar model, which is that of our housing innovation competition. Our first one we hosted in 2016, which provided numerous pathways to thinking about how design can also inform housing policy in the city. And this year, really honing in on how we can co-create Boston's future Decker. So we look at this housing innovation competition through 3 key lenses, which is first, how we can create impact by taking a look at design and build competition, also thinking about how new affordable units can be created as a result of this competition. 2, how we can generate new ideas, right? These are complex development challenges that we can't solve in-house. And we can also think about how we can implement and create intentional ways and pathways for partnerships and collaborations to be formed through this process. And then lastly, how sites are chosen. And so we take a look at, yes, the sites that are within our inventory, sites that are primarily owned by the Department of Neighborhood Development, but these are sites that aren't unique cases. They're actually representative of other city parcels that may be owned by other public entities or also private landowners. And then this sort of realm of replicability can help us demonstrate feasibility of new ideas as well. So our process for the housing innovation competition is divided up into 3 key components. And we do say 2-phased competition, but we're currently in this interim period, in this middle period of really showcasing these ideas. But we actually began by releasing a request for ideas, a new approach, which was an open call for ideas to any who were interested to share what types of housing they believe should be created or built on small lots throughout the city. And when I say small lots, we're actually talking about lots that are between 3,000 and 8,000 square feet. And so through 2 different tracks, respondents could share these ideas and also identify the barriers that would prevent these ideas from coming to fruition. Like I mentioned, we're now at our midpoint, which is an opportunity to really showcase these ideas. We had the privilege of receiving a number of truly innovative and creative and thoughtful ideas, and we're looking forward to showcasing these in the next few weeks. Now, all of this work will actually help to inform the second phase of the competition, which is where we will collaboratively craft and later release a request for proposals for a site that is yet to be selected. And I'd like to share a few common themes from the responses that we have seen. We've broken these down, and I'll just go over the 5 here illustrated. And so the first is adaptability and flexibility. So we heard from numerous folks that the future Decker should actually imagine a flexible floor plan, right? It should have the ability to grow and mold and shape and be shaped differently over time because families change, individuals' lives changes, and their home environments should be reflective of that as well. Next, we have living together. So really thinking about the importance of how we live communally. This is something that is inherently a part of a triple decker, right? You live in a building with maybe family members or folks that you know intimately. And so how can we replicate that when we begin to think about the future Decker? And also how housing or the building itself can actually become a part of a broader and more supportive neighborhood. We also heard from folks that there is a need for innovation around the materials that we use and how we build. So the different types of construction methods. So lots around modularity, but I think that at its core is really thinking about how can we make this more replicable or ease future adaptation or even help to build resilience to flooding. And as we talk about flooding, folks really highlighted the need to consider sustainability and building performances. So how can design, materials, and construction respond to the urgent needs to curb carbon emissions from buildings? And lastly, affordability, which many of us on this call will be talking about today. We need to think about how to create affordable homes and economic opportunities that consider affordability in a truly holistic manner. So that it is sustainable and can hopefully even generate wealth over time. And so I'll just end here by sharing a few learned lessons for us. We believe that a request for ideas can actually be a replicated model to help inform future development processes, because we actually really wanted to stress the fact that design and build competitions are typically geared to a particular audience, right? So architects, developers, folks that are already familiar with the language and the world of housing development, but we also need to be considering all of the folks that are typically not even considered in these development processes or can't find a way into these processes as well. We also want to remind ourselves and consistently remind ourselves that how we engage and collaborate with others is just as important as what we create, so that we are thinking about, especially now during this ongoing public health crisis, thinking about creative and hybrid approaches to engagement. We hosted a number of networking events, both virtually and in person, as safely as possible. And I think that moving forward, that's something that we'd like to consider continuing on. And lastly, we're not the sole ideators in our city, nor should we be. We have a lot of creative ideas in-house, but it is actually when we seek out those ideas from numerous others, not just in Boston, but also beyond, that we can really think about how to collaborate and further collaborate with one another. And so I'll end here and thank you all. And like I mentioned, we will be showcasing these ideas on our web pages. And so please feel free to follow up with me at any point in time. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Wandy. And okay, now I can see you. I couldn't see you before. Please, if you have any questions for Wandy or what the City of Boston is doing with the Boston Society of Architects, add it now to the chat before it's too late. But Wandy, thank you so much. And I'm from South America, born and raised. And there, you know, we say colaboración y comunidad. Like you have your community is everything, and collaboration is just a part of life. So I love to see both the work that the City of Boston is doing with the Society of Architects, with local developers, with local designers, and also love to see Boston as a part of a greater conversation across the Commonwealth, because I think there are two housing crises. You know, there's the crisis of the City of Boston and its surroundings, where the rent is very high everywhere. But when you get out of the city, you see that the costs of doing that work are still just as high as in Boston, basically. But you really can't get that money for it. People just can't pay that much. So you know, we all have the issue of lots that are vacant, that are in funny shapes, that are tricky to work on. So I appreciate Boston being here and being part of the discussion. I've been talking to the Boston Society of Architects to see how we can expand the work that they do with the City of Boston to outside of the City of Boston. Please, anybody from Gateway Cities and other cities just outside of the Boston area, please know that we are thinking of how we can collaborate and further expand our amazing base of designers and leaders across the Commonwealth. Wandy, how do you so after you go through the ideation phase and everything, how will you work towards implementation? What do those partnerships look like in terms of actually financing and building those units and making them affordable for folks of lower incomes?
Yeah, so we've begun a few conversations with folks who are truly involved in the funding processes as well. So I think that numerous folks on the call have already mentioned matching funds and things along that thread. And so really thinking creatively about how we can create those pathways for folks ahead of even releasing a request for proposals, and then also working directly with our Department of Neighborhood Development, with a development officer to really help to illustrate what those alternatives could be. And so there will be a lot of internal conversations taking place, but also numerous others to figure out who those collaborators could be.
Thank you. And what about, there's always the question of zoning and doing rehab work, especially when the lots are smaller and trickier. How are you addressing moving through that process?
Yeah, and so we are taking a look at city initiatives that already exist. So For a number of the ideas that we received, folks are actually taking a look at smaller or compact units. And so we could, in a way, build off of the work that came out of the previous housing innovation competition and really thinking around how compact and smaller units could be implemented on these smaller lots as well. And our goal is to really work closely with the folks that could propose either zoning language, thinking also about the ongoing planning initiatives in a number of the neighborhoods, such as Mattapan and a few others as well, and thinking about what are the alternatives that exist out there in terms of zoning limitations.
Thank you, Wandy. And last question, because our attendees are a little quiet right now. So what do you work regionally too? Do you are you thinking of working, say, with Cambridge or Somerville, or I live in East Boston, so there's Chelsea is more. I feel like it's more of my neighbor than actually going to the proper Boston area. So what thoughts have you had about expanding? Because the housing crisis is regional and statewide. What have been your thoughts about working with your close fellow cities?
Yeah, we would be thrilled to work with our neighbors. We also had numerous conversations with folks in Somerville and Cambridge who recently have also changed, right, affordable housing overlays and thinking about different forms of zoning overlays, also form-based codes. And so there's a lot of ongoing communication between all. But I think that, especially to those of you who are on the call, we'd love to have more and more conversations with you all.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Wandy. And Wandy will be she will stay for the panelist discussion. So if you have any other questions or any questions for the City of Boston, please send them through the chat or through the Q&A. I see that Rob has diligently answered the Q&A questions that were addressed to him. Amazing. Thank you, Robert. All right, and with that being said, and no further ado, let's give the spotlight back to Worcester. Jim, the floor will now be yours.
Hi everyone, Jim Brooks. I am the Director of Housing Development and Healthy Homes with the City of Worcester, and everyone else had their plug, Brockton, City of Champions, and of course Boston with their championships. But with the recent census, we are one of the fastest growing gateway cities in the country. So throw that plug in there while I'm getting our slides up here. All right. Can everyone see? All right. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our situation here in the city as far as our underutilized lots in the city. The city is really one of the oldest housing stocks in the country. 60% of our existing housing stock was built before 1940. So we, as Representative Keith mentioned, there's a lot of deferred maintenance in a lot of our neighborhoods. A lot of the recent press has been on in the city core with Polar Park, with all the new developments coming on, but we're really a city of neighborhoods. And those neighborhoods are in most cases, the housing stock's pretty old. So one thing we've been doing lately, this is actually based on the 2019 ACS data, but with the new data from the Census Tracts, we've actually calculated our home ownership. Sorry about that, I hit the wrong slide there. We've actually calculated our home ownership percentage based on Census Tract. And really what the city is, it's for home ownership, it's really a city of has and has nots. The city as a whole is about 40%, 41% owner occupied, 59% rental. But as you can see here, some of the neighborhoods, just as Representative Keith mentioned, are even less than 10% owner occupied. And with that, there's really a correlation that we've seen between deferred maintenance, lots that have dumping on them, really just lack of pride in some cases in the neighborhoods. So what we've done is really kind of taken a different look on our neighborhoods and how we use both our HUD funded home ownership money and other buckets of money to really address those neighborhoods. And it really came to light around 2013. One of our private high school institutions, the neighborhood had really gotten so bad, they were thinking about actually taking up their campus and moving. So all of our departments were brought together to really look at this neighborhood and how we could move that neighborhood forward and really address some of not just the housing issues, there were crime issues. We had a firefighter die in that neighborhood due to unsafe building conditions. So there were a lot of things going on. And one of the things we came up with is really to break down a lot of the silos within the city, within the municipal government. So our department, my department primarily deals with both existing housing stock, rehabbing existing housing stock, as well as developing new construction throughout the city. So we teamed up with the Inspectional Services Department, Police Department, Code Department, and our Health and Human Service Department. So one of the other things we noticed in these neighborhoods, there was high incidence of both lead poisoning for children and high incidence of pediatric asthma. There were kids in the school systems missing over 20 days of school due to asthma attacks. So there was high correlation between all these different municipal agencies. So what we did, the first thing we did is come up with what we call a sweeps program, where we'll pick a day or a week and we'll all go door to door talking to the residents. What's going on? What physical building issues do you have? What crime issues? The fire department will come in, test their smoke alarms, look, to make sure there's no hoarding issues. Health and Human Services will go in, talk to residents about asthma, lead poisoning. Potentially, in the past, they've given vaccines right on site, those type of things. So it's really, we're actually reaching out to the neighborhoods, going door to door, and really assessing the conditions of the neighborhoods. And one thing we noticed is during this process, there's kind of clusters that pop up within a neighborhood. So there could be 3 or 4 buildings, as Robert mentioned, we call them zombie properties, where they're paying taxes. There's really no reason to kind of cite them or have, really watch them, but they're really not contributing to the neighborhood. There's deferred maintenance there. Maybe they're trash on the lawn. There's just some items that really need to be taken care of. Maybe there's vacant units in the property, those type of things. So there's those zombie properties. Also, in a lot of cases, the city has lots in those properties. Most of the time, due to tax title taking, we've acquired just small lots. A lot of them are not developable, but some of them are. And then in almost every neighborhood, what we've identified is what we call the owner anchor. That person who really takes pride in their neighborhood, regardless of what's going on. And what we found is that they're really the key to turning the neighborhood around. Finding that owner anchor who can tell you everything about what's going on and really, has pride in the neighborhood. So what we've done is take that cluster and we take it cluster by cluster and really come up with a plan on how on that little cluster of properties. When I talk cluster of properties, it's 10 properties or less is really what we're looking at, maybe like a street. So this kind of gives you an idea. Once we do the sweeps, we've identified those kind of cluster of properties. We did this for 4 or 5 years up in the neighborhood that, like I said, abutted Worcester Academy. It's called Union Hill. And it really turned around the neighborhood. We included some street improvements, infrastructure improvements there also. So now we have 2 other areas that we're looking at. One is in Representative Keith's district. It's the Piedmont, Pleasant Street, Austin Street area. and then also in Green Island. Green Island is a neighborhood that abuts all the new development with the Red Sox Stadium. So there's a lot of new construction, a lot of things going on. But really what this was an old industrial area that had triple deckers and really tenements designed for those workers who worked in the factories. And with some of the gentrification coming with the new properties that in most cases are market rate, we do have one or two that are going to have affordable. We want to make sure we don't leave those residents behind. So we're really going in and doing the same thing in those neighborhoods. The pictures down below are kind of an example of some of the lots that right now we're working on with some of the existing clusters of structures, mostly 2 and 3 unit buildings, to really identify. And what we did also, as I mentioned before, is there's a lot of lots that the city owns. We did an inventory. There's about 130 potential lots. Most of them have some type of issues, whether they're not big enough, there's zoning issues, there's wetland issues. In some cases, there's like culverts and stuff, so we couldn't really do much. 38 kind of passed our initial, okay, this potentially has enough space, enough square footage. Zoning wise, it's okay. And then looking further into that, there's 13 that are really located in those 17 census tracts that we really want to focus on even further. So that's one way, like I said, we've identified some of those lots. The other way is similar to what Robert was saying. We held what we call Chapter 139 meetings on a monthly basis. Really what this does is it tracks all of our properties throughout the city, whether it's fires, whether it's abandonment, foreclosure, those issues. So we're really tracking that process. And that's where a lot of our projects come from. A lot of those projects are in those, or a lot of those buildings are in those clusters of properties that we identify. A lot of times there's fires, they're just dilapidated, the owners don't have funds to fix them. So that Chapter 139 process kind of brings to light a lot of those clusters of properties that we're dealing with. And what it does is we really do two things. We try to help those owners, especially if they're owner occupied, help them through the process with grants and other things. But it also identifies where we really need to take a bigger look and really kind of match up a lot of our resources for those. So based on the 139 process, a lot of times we can either issue a demo order or they're referred to, as Robert was talking about, the Mass General Law 111 for receivership. So that's one way we track them. So the next thing is in those identified clusters, we'll do an RFP for our city-owned lots. And as part of that RFP, we want to make sure that it includes home ownership. In most cases, first-time affordable home ownership, especially if it's in those 17 census tracts that really don't have much owner-occupied housing. The other thing we do, as I mentioned, we have the old housing stock. We'll identify some nonprofit developers to go into those multi-unit buildings to work with either the owners if they want to remain there and remain owner, or they'll just simply buy the property and rehab the property also. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier, a lot of those anchors that I was talking about that really have an interest in the neighborhood, they've lived in the property for a long time. They grew up on this property. Their family, multi-generational, have been in that property. And now they're getting to a point where they really can't keep up with the maintenance of the property. So they're facing somewhat of a dilemma. They want to stay in their neighborhood. They're comfortable in their neighborhood. They have their support systems. But really the property they're in is not suitable for their current situation, whether it's, they're in a wheelchair or what have you. So one thing we look at also for those lots is to develop elder type housing, single story housing, that will provide an opportunity for that anchor, that homeowner to remain in that same neighborhood that they have their support system in. And then the other thing it does is it brings back some of those zombie units that elder maybe lived on the first floor of a triple decker. They're not renting out the second and third floor because they don't want to deal with tenants, or they had a bad experience in the past with a tenant. And it really allows us to add really 2 units of inventory back into the system, back into the city. So that's one thing. As I said, when we look at anchors, that's one of the things we do to identify that anchors needs too longer term. So this kind of just gives you a quick example of some of the projects we've done. This, as I mentioned previous, this is in our Union Hill neighborhood. So this was a vacant lot on the left. There was a lot of dumping going along, a lot of illegal drug use back there, that type of thing. This project is actually with Habitat for Humanity. We're building 3 units of first-time homebuyer housing. They should be hopefully complete by this fall. Another month and a half, right around November, those units should come online. So that's kind of what we're doing there. In the picture on the left, the 3 triple deckers on the far left-hand side here, they were part of the cluster way. We went in and rehabbed all 3 of those units. And brought them up to current standards. With one of them actually had a fire, so we completely got rehab that one, and the other 2 did some smaller scale rehab. So that's kind of just a general idea of what we talk about when there's a cluster. There's two more units, one over here and one over here that we're working with now to kind of complete that cluster. And then this is another lot across the street were 2 units of housing that we completely rehabbed. This was another lot that was kind of forgotten, kind of a dumping ground. One of our local CDCs. Again, this is kind of an elder owned the triple decker next door. Now they're actually going to move into this unit here. It's all single floor. Provides for that elder's needs. So how do we fund these? In most cases, as I said, we have HUD funding. We use different mechanisms through HUD funding. We are right now developing an affordable housing trust fund in the city. We're looking to initially fund that through ARPA funds. We're just, right now we're doing public outreach for our ARPA funds, but it looks like we'll have between $10 and $20 million of additional allocation from ARPA for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And in addition to that, there's a lot of private sources in the city, a lot of CDC funders, bank loans. And then one thing I did forget to mention also, in some of these larger lots that you can see here on the bottom right, we're actually working with developers now for MassHousing's Commonwealth Builder Program. So these are larger lots where we can put in, enough housing to make that Commonwealth Builder Program work. That will provide even more affordability for those units. So with that, that's what I had. Definitely open the questions, and thank you.
Jim, thank you. That was so much information. How can we even begin? Thank you so much. Well, we can begin by, do you want to unshare your screen if people want to see our faces, but your information is there. I don't know. Let me add. Okay, so if you have any other questions for Jim, I see one in the chat, but please send them in. First of all, I am completely overwhelmed by the amount of incredible work you're doing. I mean, I've always heard of the incredible things that Worcester is doing, so it's awesome to see them all on a screen and hear you talk about them. I have so many questions. I mean, the whole notion of owner anchors and thinking of folks staying in their communities, it's like an ADU. It's like creating an accessory dwelling unit, but at a neighborhood, not at somebody's backyard, right? Like allowing folks that that are invested in their communities to stay there and taking advantage of these tiny lots. And, you know, everything around health and housing. I mean, just, you know, it is a real threat when houses literally just burst up in flame, you know, and when kids get lead poisoning and miss multiple days of school because of asthma, never mind the long-term effects of it. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. So Anne asks one question, asking when you started talking, you were talking about the census tracts and you know the how different it is between homeowner tracts and renter tracts. And you guys have so many fantastic universities and places of knowledge. One of my very good friends from Ecuador actually goes to Clark, so I get to go see him often in the beautiful commuter line. But she asks, how many of the census tracts have a high college student population?
So there's actually 2 complete census tracts that that are just colleges. One is Holy Cross. They have a complete census tract, and Clark actually their campus is a complete census tract. So we didn't include those because there's only I think like 20 or 30 actual residents that show up on those census tracts. You know, the chancellors and those type of administrative positions are really the only ones that show up on those 2 census tracts. But surrounding those census tracts, you know, where students are living in private housing, those are included.
Awesome, thank you. And you said that you work with a lot of nonprofit developers. What does that look like? Is it CDCs? Is it just, you know, other? I know Habitat for Humanity does a lot of work. And then after that, I'm curious. I know that a lot of the development being done in Gateway City specifically are just small scale developers. Maybe it's, you know, one person and his brother, or, you know, it's just, it's very small scale. So how do you also support those entrepreneurs, a lot of who are people of color too?
Sure. Yeah, no, so as I mentioned, when we RFP city-owned lots, it's really we're RFPing for affordable housing, whether a CDC gets it or a private developer. As part of the deed restriction, there's going to be a deed restriction for, in most cases, it's a first-time home buyer. Some, you know, in some places where you have a higher owner-occupied, will you know, allow for affordable rental use for that lot. But that's really how we make sure that for the lots we RFP that happens. There are some private developers, as you mentioned, who are really interested in this space, whether they own 2 or 3, you know, multifamilies on the street, and they want to make sure that this street, you know, continues to thrive. So they've bought into our process of making sure, you know, that there's affordable home ownership for that stability of their assets in the neighborhood.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we have a fun question from MJ Adams saying, if you could wave a wand and remove one barrier from redevelopment minus money, so you can't just say more money, what would it be? And this is a good question, so we'll start with you, Jim, but then I think we should ask everybody that.
So one barrier. So I mean, financing is always an issue, but one barrier I think that when people hear affordability, there's always that NIMBYism. So if we could remove a lot of that NIMBYism, where you know there's that negative stigma of affordability, I think that would probably be my one thing.
Yes, NIMBYism is one thing that holds true regardless of where in the Commonwealth we are. So, okay, now we will remove spotlights and view it as a gallery. And I think we can start our panel discussion, but I like this question. So we can move on to Representative Mary Keefe. If you could remove one barrier that is not money to support redevelopment, especially of small lots and other vacant, I mean, we have so many vacant structures or structures in disrepair, what would it be?
Well, we've talked about this in our neighborhood stabilization conversations, and it's a real dilemma, and it has to do with the formula for when stricter state regulations are actually thresholded or implemented. And just to explain what that is, I'll give you an example. Two exactly the same buildings. One is in Wellesley and one is in Worcester. Those stricter regulations kick in once you've met 30% of your assessed value. So in Wellesley, that could be up to $300,000. And for the exact same building, because it's assessed at a lower rate, that could be $30,000. So your cost in terms of renovating a building in Worcester is going to kick in and become much higher at a lower investment rate. And so it's a disincentive in a lot of ways for people to take care of their properties and to do what they need to do. So that's something that we keep bringing up. Ben knows about this too from MassHousing. It's been part of our conversation. Something that Chris Walsh, my colleague who has passed several years ago, architect, really raised up and showed a real strong light on this. So I'd like to see that conversation keep going.
Here, here. I hear this so much. I did some of the roundtables with HED's office, and it was something that just kept coming up. Just it's so, again, the costs are so similar, but the threshold is it is a disproportionate impact. So thank you, Robert. What about you? If you could wave the magic wand, what would it be?
That's a very good question. And I like Representative Keefe's analogy because it's happened here over and over. And Jim, I love the NIMBYism, but you don't need a magic wand to do that. You just need people to be educated. If I had a magic wand and some magic dust, I'd eliminate all the bureaucracy, all the paperwork and the work you have to do in order to build affordable housing. I mean, we have to, and this is probably based on our training and living in Massachusetts. We are so creative at coming up with ways. And I've been to other parts of the country and they say, wow, you're doing that in Massachusetts? They allow you to do that in Massachusetts? Yeah, they do, until we're challenged, until someone says you can't do it. Yeah, we come up with creative ways. So yeah, I cut back on the bureaucracy, a lot of the paperwork just to build affordable housing. I wish it was as easy to build affordable housing as it is to build market housing. If I had a magic wand and a little magic dust.
Amazing. So we have NIMBYism, regulations about redevelopment, the lovely bureaucracy that we live in. And Wandy, what about you?
I think as much as I could go down the pathway of talking a little bit about exclusionary zoning, I feel like that's to some extent been mentioned already. But I think that my sort of like magic wand idea would be collaborative methods of ownership, right? So I know that there's a lot of limitations of how co-ops are structured here. There's a lot of potential legislation that could come up around co-housing models as well. And I think that there's a lot of interest in that area, but we just haven't seen it take hold yet.
Great. So I have a question now for the panel. And actually, Representative Keefe just touched on us a little bit around just sort of how we tax some of these properties. And, you know, traditionally speaking, it's just a residential tax. Sort of the more you improve your home, you're almost penalized in a sense because you've done improvements. Now it's valued higher, and therefore you're going to be assessed at a higher rate. I'm sort of wondering if folks have thought about, you know, is there a way to do kind of more of a blended approach where you include a lot more land tax value as opposed to just residential property value, to sort of think about how do we incentivize people to build on some of these underutilized or vacant plots because they're just sitting there. And if we don't tax the land whatsoever, the way we currently do in most places, chances are nothing's really going to get built there. But if you can sort of change that dynamic, potentially, theoretically, something would get built there. So again, just sort of wondering if folks have encountered, you know, land value tax or some kind of blended approach to do that.
I can't say that I've had those conversations or really wrap my brain around that, but that's an interesting proposal. I think one of the things that the city of Worcester is doing is acquiring some software that helps them to track these properties in a more holistic way. And I think we've seen it on neighborhood levels, and this would go to those kinds of options. But there are lots of little conversations that happen in places, in community rooms and offices in City Hall. And there's a disconnect, or there could be a better connect. And I'm excited that the city is moving in this direction, because I think without that network of how you think about a property, you can't really conceive of what those options are and what better alternatives there might be. So I'm sorry, I can't answer the full question, but maybe someone else can do a better job. But I think that some of the things we're doing in Worcester are really going to help with that.
Sebastian, way to ask a really hard question. Well, I'm curious, hearing each other and hearing the different initiatives, and I know Robert's well connected with many cities, I know that the gateway cities speak to each other, but just hearing Boston speak and hearing, like Wandy, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on what these different initiatives and challenges are in other cities that are huge, right? Where primarily households of color live. The gateways to the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Just hearing what your thoughts are of what challenges are shared or opportunities shared, and I'd love to hear the same from the rest too.
Yeah, I think I'm immensely grateful to be among you all today, because it is interesting to know that there are so many similar initiatives taking place across the Commonwealth. And while some folks might be incredibly well connected, there are perhaps a few of us that could truly benefit from these types of collaborations. And so I think one of the things that I know typically comes up in conversations is what the vision might be. And so is there even a pathway for us to think about how some of the future Decker ideas could be implemented in a few of the gateway cities as well, right? There were design ideas that came through. There were financial models that folks also really highlighted. And if there is an opportunity to think about this type of collaboration, it would do us a lot of service as well. I think that there's the sort of graph or image that really shows how much housing is built in Boston versus in other parts of Massachusetts. And I think that that greater distribution of housing opportunities is something that will benefit everybody in the long run.
Yeah, Jim, Robert, Rep, have you learned anything else from your fellow colleagues here today? I always love hearing that question, because I think Wandy mentioned it before, like, we are not necessarily keepers of knowledge. It should be a shared experience. And I think cities, municipalities in general, it's always fascinating when they just take other ideas and they shape it specific to their communities. So sort of, what have you seen that you've taken from other, whether it be Boston or another gateway city, that's really worked well for you? Because I know, Robert, you had mentioned before that typically speaking, something will usually work well in one gateway city and another if they're a similar size.
This is true. And just to get to Wandy's point or her presentation, Brockton is a very small, I'd call a small micronism of Dorchester. We have every type of housing. We have, I know we have six packs. That's the first time I've ever heard it called a six pack, but we do have six packs here in Brockton. We definitely have, just like in Worcester, we have 2s and 3s, triple deckers. How we deal with those, and I haven't really given a lot of thought to your presentation, Wandy, how we deal with those when the folks that are in there now, and a lot of them are elderly, aging in place. A lot of that has been actually what I would call how people build wealth, especially during the 50s and 60s. That's how they built wealth. That's how the first immigrants, and Brockton is an immigrant community. We are a minority majority community. And we need to think in vision, and I think Rob May's on here. We need to start thinking about this, and I think through the corporation, the 121A corporation, that's something we should think about and at least have on the agenda on how we deal with those properties as they come about, because they will come about. Our model of doing 2s and 3s and singles, mostly singles and 2s through our receivership program is one model. We've kind of stayed away from doing the triple deckers. We definitely stayed away from doing the 6-packs because we just don't have the capacity or the wherewithal to do that. But I think I can learn something from Wandy's presentation, just how you deal. How do you redesign those for today or tomorrow, the future? That's what we need to be thinking about, because it's amazing. No one thought we'd be in a pandemic for a year and a half, 2 years, and we are. It's changed so much. Pricing, finance. Jim has mentioned financials. We all deal with them, and you think they were bad a year ago or 6 months ago, they're going to be worse in another 12 months. So we really do need to start thinking of financial models and how we make them work, especially for affordable housing. It's great that the governor and the administration is looking at affordable housing and making it a priority, because as affordable housing goes, whether we realize it or not, that's how our economy grows. If you don't have workers that can live in your community, you're going to be in trouble. I think the Cape is actually experiencing that over the summer. There's no affordable housing on the Cape. And I hate to say that, but I know I talk to the people that work in Barnstable, and there is no affordable housing that you can, or very little. And usually now you're looking at finding help and they can't find it. We experience a little bit here in Brockton. We probably experience more in Metro Boston. Finding affordable housing is essential to our economy continuing to grow and growing.
Amazing. Here. Jim, do you have any other thoughts?
So as Robert mentioned, I think we're kind of at a critical time here. We have all this money coming in from ARPA, from other sources. And in a lot of cases, a lot of our staff, we're still, there's still the same staff who are dealing with previous levels of funding. And really now's the time to collaborate, find best practices throughout the state. We came up with that anchor homeowner approach actually from Springfield when they experienced the tornado that went through, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago at this point. That's really what they did. They talked to that person who really cared about the neighborhood and grew from there. So we developed that same model, in what we wanted to do here. So I think sharing the best practices, best models throughout the state in the next year or so is really going to be critical, because there's going to be a lot of funding coming into the state for housing, and doing housing the same way we've always done it isn't probably the best path forward.
Thank you. And what is happening? Okay. Just a little funny thing from the chat. So other names for the 6-packs, double triples and perfect 6s. So thank you to Rob May from Brockton and Christine Medore from MHP for those brilliant names. That being said, thank you all so much. I want to take just a quick moment before we say goodbye to share. Can you see my screen? I don't know if you can see my screen. Let me try again. I don't see anybody anymore. Oh my God. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint? Yes. Okay, great. So I'm usually really good with technology, I swear. No, not from beginning. Well, anyways, we have a few more sessions coming up. So next week, we have local and regional partnerships for affordable homes. We'll have our wonderful executive director of MassHousing, Chris LaCornegay, speaking, Chris Clutchman, who knows all the alphabet soup of DHCD programs. She'll be speaking and telling us what all the acronyms stand for. And we'll have really awesome discussions with the City of Chelsea, City of Malden and North Shore CDC about the work that they're doing. We also have our last session, which is on home repairs, rehabs, and remodels. Sometimes we call them remodels when it's certain types of homes, and other types they're called rehabs. So we'll have Abby Will from Harvard's Joint Center for Housing Studies talking about the data behind the numbers of why there was nothing at Home Depot for a year, while in a pandemic where certain communities were getting impacted more than others. We'll have Peter Shapiro from Mass Landlords talking about how to be a good landlord and good landlord programs, and Liz Murphy from the City of Fitchburg talking about incentives and regulations to rehab homes. We also have a new round of Neighborhood Hub applications coming up this fall. If you're part of this webinar, you'll receive an email telling you when it opens, but it's open for all cities and towns. Sorry, now you just have to bear with me. And it's a 2-year program for municipalities and local partners. It's up to $100,000 in grants. And we are providing preferences for COVID-19 impacted communities and those most impacted by the 2008 recession. Again, the hub is managed by myself at MassHousing, but we have an amazing advisory because we do believe that collaboration is how we get things done. So we have MassInc, Ben Foreman just spoke, the Attorney General's Office, MACDC, Mass Development, Mass Housing Partnership, and DHCD. So be on the lookout for a new round of applicants. Again, this year's Brockton was one of them, and we're really excited to see all the work being done. With that being said, I want to thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you for staying here and sharing all the amazing work you're doing. And Sebastian can close it off with some words.
Yeah, I mean, again, I wanted to just say thank you, Francis, for putting this together. Thank you to our panelists for informing us about what's going on in their municipalities and their communities. I mean, I think that if you're on this Zoom right now, thank you for wanting to be informed and come get some ideas that hopefully you'll take back to whatever community or neighborhood you're working in. I think everyone here understands how critical it is to just continue to build more affordable housing so that people can remain should they want to, or have the ability to move to another municipality should they want to as well. And so it's critical that we just continue to work. I think time and time again, one of the themes that you heard today was collaboration is key. And so if you have any questions to any of the panelists or myself or Francis, please don't hesitate to reach out, because again, you can't solve a problem that you don't know. So please reach out to folks, be informed, make those connections, and let's work together to solve these critical issues that is affordable housing in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thank you, everyone.